David, I want to shift focus just a little bit here in the last 10, 15 minutes or so that we have here. And I wanted to ask you about the business of this Jimmy Savile in the UK right now. I've only peripherally kind of read about this. And how does this tie into the larger picture of what's going on right now?
Well, this was fascinating to me when this came out, because I've been talking about this guy, Jimmy Savile, being a pedophile and a necrophiliac. He used to have a thing about sex with dead people. For many years, back to the late 90s. And of course, Icke's a nutter and all that stuff. But a television program has just come out. He died in 2011, Jimmy Savile, at the age of 84. And a television program came out which exposed the fact that he, over a long period of time, for decades, and more's come out now. I mean, crikey, it's just exploding. This guy must been at it all the time. But he was abusing underage children, usually girls. That's come out, but actually there's more to it than that. And he worked at the BBC. That was his main, prime point of public exposure. And he used to do a lot of charity work. He used to run marathons. He used to volunteer to be porters in hospitals, and he used to have charities to raise money for hospitals. And these hospitals would give him a room, an office, even sometimes a bedroom in the hospital. He used to do the same at a place called Broadmoor for, seriously mentally disturbed people and criminals and killers as a result of their psychiatric state. And he was seen as the national treasure. He started out in the late 50s, early 60s, when the great swinging 60s music scene started in Britain, and a new genre appeared called the disc jockey. He started out on Radio Luxembourg, this kind of iconic radio station of the 60s, and then he went into the BBC and all that stuff. And he openly talked about his closeness to the British royal family. And later on in years, he would talk about the fact that he was untouchable, that there was nothing he couldn't do, and there was no one that could touch him, whatever he did, and all the rest of it. And he died, this old guy of 84, and he was given a hero's funeral. Jimmy Savile, what a great man. Good on you, Governor. Well, that's not what they're thinking now, because the dike has been breached and it's coming out. But what is coming out at the moment? What's coming out is that he was the most serial pedophile, and also that he started his charities and did his charity work to get access to children and stuff in hospitals. Well, he did something else, as I was pointing out back in the late 90s, Henrik. He got involved with hospitals because hospitals have mortuaries. Satisfy his love of sex with dead bodies and stuff. I mean, this man was seriously way out there. But this is the bigger picture. And what's not coming out, but should, and I was talking to a journalist today about it, I hope something will move forward as a result of it, is the reason he was untouchable, the reason that he could do anything he liked, and that there were, over the years, police investigations started into claims of his pedophilia with underage girls, but those investigations came nowhere, was because that he wasn't just a pedophile, he was a procurer of children for the rich and famous, including the royal family. It's not a accident or coincidence that Savile, in his own words, said that he was introduced to the royal family, first of all in the 1960s, by a man called Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was a known paedophile by anyone who's investigated this. And it was Mountbatten that introduced Savile to Prince Philip and Prince Charles, and Savile became very, very close to both of them until he had a massive row, apparently, with Philip. And I was told all this in the late 90s by a lady called Christine Fitzgerald, who had been a close friend of and confidant of Princess Diana for 9 years, acknowledged as such by the media. But they fell out in the last little while before Diana was killed. But she told me about Mountbatten. She told me about Charles. She told me about what went on in the royal family, about the Satanism, about the pedophilia, and also what was left field for me at the time about Jimmy Savile, as others have too. And I said to them, you know, why would the royal family be so close to this aging disc jockey? And then they told me about the pedophilia and the necrophilia and all the rest of it. And so because he was a procurer of children, it meant that he was never going to go down so long as he kept quiet and you know, played the game as they wanted it played, and on doing what he was doing for them. He would never go down because their backs and his back are the same back, because if he goes to court and starts blubbing, then they're in trouble. So this is one of the reasons that this secrecy and protection is so powerful within these pedophile and satanic rings, Henrik. It's because all the backs are dependent upon other backs not being, you know, collared for this stuff. So they support each other. And if you've got your people in the judiciary, in the law, in politics, in social services, in law enforcement, police and stuff, then you have, and in coroners' offices and all the rest of it, then you have the ring in the places that can put the lid on something and stop the truth coming out. This man, Thomas Hamilton, who shot all the children at the Dunblane school in Scotland in 1996, he was a procurer of children. He was a paedophile himself, but he was a procurer of children for the rich and famous. And what happens is one of two things. If you're doing that and you're playing the game, as Savile was, keeping his mouth shut, he actually did an interview with Esquire magazine in which he actually said that one of the reasons that he was liked by the royal family is that he was able to work, quote, deep cover and do things which no one knew he was doing. And he said that the royal family were always asking him to Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, where Princess Diana lived after the breakup with Charles, to Highgrove, Charles's country estate, and all the rest of it. And he said, oh, they like the way that I have a laugh and my sense of humor. Well, I don't think that one of the most powerful families on earth are going to allow and invite so constantly, so regularly, a aging disc jockey into their inner sanctum just because he's a good laugh. And also, according to Savile, he was invited to have Christmas dinner with Margaret Thatcher many times over the years when she was prime minister. And now the stories are starting to appear about the fact that Savile was providing children for a guy called Ted Heath. Well, Ted Heath was in my books, The Biggest Secret. It came out in 1998. When I named him, 5-7 years before he died, he was still a politician, as not just a practicing Satanist and pedophile, but a serial child killer. And the passage in the book was read to him by a journalist as soon as after it came out in 1998, and nothing happened because I was spot on with that, because I don't cross the line to naming people like that unless I've got a lot of back research, and I'm absolutely sure I don't want to name people when it's not true. Sure. And Heath has been connected to the Jersey Children's Home. That story that broke some years ago, and then the genuine police investigation was blocked, just as the one in Belgium was with Mark Dutroux.
That's right.
And Savile's connected to the same Jersey Children's Home. He denied through his lawyer, when a newspaper mentioned some years ago, when the story broke about the Jersey home, that he had been there and all. He denied he'd ever been there, and then pictures appeared of him with the kids. So all this stuff with Savile, I wrote an article at the weekend, and I called it Jimmy Savile, Doorway to the Cesspit, because he is. Because if you carry on researching through his own paedophilia, which is what the mainstream media in Britain are pretty much holding it at the moment, and you go into the procurement of children for the rich and famous that he was up to, then the questions the media are asking now is, how could he work at the BBC and he'd be abusing underage girls in BBC dressing rooms, and BBC people knew about it? How could he do this? How could he do that? How come he was never known? How come there wasn't an investigation? Well, once you take in or bring in he was procuring children for the rich and famous, then you know why none of that happened. And it is an opportunity to really lift the lid on some of this stuff, and for people to start to realize that, you know, it's not crazy to say these things have been going on. It is just telling the truth. In fact, he has a nephew, Jimmy Savile, called Guy Marsden, who's now he's 59. I think he's 59, and he talked to a newspaper recently after the Jimmy Savile story broke, in which he told a story of him and his mates. He comes from Leeds in the north of England, this area where Savile comes from and lived. And he said they ran away from Leeds, got on I think it was a train to London, and ended up at King's Cross Station in London, which is a notorious place for paedophiles picking up kids who've run away from home. And he said they got to Euston Station and they were picked up by this sleazy guy and taken to this grubby flat. He said about 4 days later, Jimmy Savile, his uncle, turns up at the flat, this grubby flat. And it turns out it's a coincidence. He doesn't know his nephew's there, because his nephew's not told anybody, hasn't told his parents or anything. But Savile's turned up, not because his nephew's there, but to meet the sleazy guy who picked him up at Euston Station. And when Savile saw his nephew, the nephew says in this interview, I thought I was in trouble because I'd run away from home and hadn't told my parents where I was. But no, he said what Jimmy Savile did, Uncle Jimmy, is he just took them to a better place. And it was the plush home of some pop music impresario, as he says, but he didn't name him. And this plush place and one or two others he was taken to with his mates were the venues for paedophile parties, when famous people in film, television, everything, entertainment, came and abused these kids, but never abused the kids from Leeds. They were left out of it, probably because of, it was Jimmy Savile's nephew. But Jimmy Savile, he said, would bring children to the parties, and he said sometimes he would come with a man dressed as a priest, which made them think that, hey, these kids are coming from children's homes, which is exactly right. First of all, you have these bloodlines which are genetically and for other reasons addicted to pedophilia, and then you need to satisfy that demand, shall we say,
right.
You people procuring children for those people, and the people procuring them need children to procure. And what they do, they target children's homes where the parents are not there to look after them. Often people in the ring are on the staff in the children's homes, sometimes in completely staffing children's homes, some of them, and thus every now and again, you have these pedophile children's home scandals which break, the lid gets on them and people forget about it, and it carries on as before. And this is what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. People are going about their lives and watching the game show and watching the, X Factor and all this stuff. This is what's happening in the world, in the peripheral vision that you're not seeing. Yeah.
And it's also after, of course, he's dead and buried, that this comes out. This is at a time when he can't talk about it and potentially point any fingers that would implicate others that have been participating in these kinds of activities. How did this break, by the way? Who told was there a BBC documentary about this, you said?
No, I said there's another story there, because we have a current affairs program on BBC. It goes out every weeknight, quite late, called Newsnight, and it looks at the stories of the day and the stories of the time in more depth than the news bulletins do. Yeah. And after his death in 2011, they began an investigation into the background to Jimmy Savile in terms of his pedophilia. And again, there is going to be a so-called independent investigation into this. People don't know why. The investigation at a late stage before broadcast was blocked and stopped from being made public. And one of the suggestions is it's because the BBC at that time had a series of programs all ready to go, eulogizing this wonderful man, Jimmy Savile, and all the great work he did and all the rest of it. And they didn't want to spoil that party. But whatever was the reason, it was suppressed. Yeah. What actually happened, it came out of nowhere, really, is that it was suddenly announced that this independent television documentary was going out to expose Jimmy Savile's pedophilia against underage girls who'd come forward. And there was a great friend, an associate of Jimmy Savile, called Jonathan King, who was a pop impresario, could well have been the one this nephew was talking about. And he went to jail a few years ago for pedophilia. And there was another guy, another friend of a close friend of Jimmy Savile called Gary Glitter, a pop star who also went to prison for pedophilia. But, Jimmy Savile was Teflon man and stayed out of the loop. And the person that the police investigator who put Jonathan King away was actually the man who did the investigation for the program and came up with the story that he did. But what happened with that is that it breached the dike. It was interesting in and of itself that it exposed Savile up to a point with underage girls. But what has followed that, Henrik, is just an explosion of other people coming forward now with the confidence that they're going to be listened to at last.
Right.
About a week ago, I've not seen it since, but about a week ago, the police said they were up to 340 leads in the investigation into Savile's activities. Well, as I said at the time, think of any number you like, double it and multiply it, and then you'll get something like the number of victims of Savile over 50 years and more, 50, 60 years.
Wow. Yeah, more of this is being revealed every day now. It's horrible stuff, but at least it's coming to the surface, and as we have said many times before, at least when we begin to find out, we can do something about it, get it into the mass consciousness, and then hopefully at some point be able to prevent all of this as well.